"Stop this wedding right now." The sharp, commanding voice reverberated through the garden, halting the ceremony in an instant. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the small crowd, and the bride, Emily Kensington, froze in place at the altar. Her father, Robert Kensington, stood at the edge of the aisle, his face red with fury, his piercing gaze locked on the man beside her. James Carter, Emily's groom, held her trembling hand firmly, his calm demeanor unshaken despite the heated stares. The love in his eyes was unmistakable, but so was the resolve. Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest, torn between the man who raised her and the man she had chosen to love. "You think you can marry my daughter?" Robert sneered, his words laced with contempt. "Do you even know who you're standing next to?" The guests sat in stunned silence, unsure of what would unfold next. Emily's voice quivered as she began to speak, but James gently squeezed her hand, stepping forward with quiet confidence. "Sir," James said, his voice steady, "with all due respect, this is not your decision to make. What happened next would change everything and leave everyone speechless. Let's rewind to see how it all began." The Kensington estate was a world of marble and gold, where every surface gleamed with wealth and power. From the sprawling manicured gardens to the grand chandelier-lit halls, it was a place where every detail spoke of privilege. Yet, for Emily Kensington, it was nothing more than a gilded cage. Growing up as the only child of billionaire Robert Kensington, she had everything money could buy, but none of it filled the void in her heart. Her father, a man whose word was law, dictated every aspect of her life. From the moment she could walk, Emily had been groomed to reflect the family legacy. Poised, polished, and obedient, her education, her social circle, even her future husband, Robert had meticulously curated it all. To him, the Kensington name was a brand, and Emily was its ambassador. But behind the glossy exterior was a young woman longing for freedom. While her friends posted about romantic getaways or spontaneous adventures, Emily's days were a rigid schedule of charity galas, business dinners, and lessons on how to marry well. Every morning, she joined her father at the breakfast table, where discussions centered on investments and alliances, not laughter or love. She was expected to smile, agree, and never ask for more. Yet, Emily yearned for more. She would steal moments in the estate's vast library, escaping into novels that spoke of passion, authenticity, and a world untouched by the rules of high society. Among the leather-bound books, she allowed herself to dream of a life where she could make her own choices, live for herself, and perhaps one day, find a love that was hers alone. Her father's expectations loomed over her like a shadow. "Emily," he would say, his voice as cold as the polished floors they dined upon, "your future is too important to risk on foolish whims." In his world, love was a transaction, and marriage was a merger. Any deviation from his plans was unthinkable. Emily's loneliness deepened as she watched those around her live authentically, while she played her part in a life that didn't feel like her own. She knew that defying Robert would mean risking everything: her home, her inheritance, her very identity. But what kind of life was it to be a puppet in someone else's play? Before we dive deeper into Emily's story, I want to connect with all of you, my incredible viewers. Have you ever felt trapped by others' expectations, longing to break free and follow your heart? Let me know where you're watching from by dropping your country's flag in the comments. And if you believe in the power of love to conquer even the deepest divides, hit that like button, because this story will prove just how powerful love can be. Emily didn't know it yet, but her gilded cage was about to shatter. One fateful night, at one of her father's grand charity galas, she would meet someone who would change her life forever. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The Kensington Annual Charity Gala was a glittering affair, a night when the city's elite gathered to sip champagne and discuss business disguised as philanthropy. Emily Kensington, draped in an exquisite emerald gown that mirrored her eyes, descended the grand staircase with practiced grace. To the guests, she was a vision of poise and perfection. To herself, she was playing a role she had grown weary of. Her father, Robert, stood at the center of the room, his commanding presence ensuring that no detail escaped his control. Emily caught his approving nod as her heels clicked against the marble floor. Another flawless performance. As the evening unfolded, Emily found herself immersed in a sea of polite small talk and empty flattery. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and carefully disguised ambition. Her father's associates, ever eager to curry favor, made their introductions, each one less memorable than the last. Emily smiled, nodded, and endured, all while the same question echoed in her mind. Is this all there is? The monotony of the evening broke with the distant sound of an alarm. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd as whispers followed. Moments later, a small team of firefighters entered the grand hall, their presence a stark contrast to the polished opulence around them. A minor kitchen fire had triggered the alarm, nothing serious, but enough to require a professional inspection. Most guests regarded the interruption as an inconvenience. Emily, however, felt a spark of curiosity. Among the firefighters, one man stood out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair damp with sweat. His uniform, though simple, carried an air of purpose that made him seem more grounded, more real, than anyone else in the room. Emily found herself captivated by his calm efficiency as he spoke with the event coordinator, his deep voice steady and reassuring. "Everything's under control," he said, his words slicing through the murmurs of concern. His gaze briefly met Emily's, and she felt her heart skip a beat. It was a fleeting moment, but it left an impression she couldn't shake. As the firefighters began to wrap up their inspection, Emily saw him again near the exit, summoning a courage she didn't know she had. She approached him. "Thank you for your help tonight," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I'm Emily." He smiled, a genuine, unpolished smile that set him apart from the rehearsed grins she was used to. "James Carter," he replied, "just doing my job." For a moment, they stood in silence, the world around them fading into a blur of glittering chandeliers and murmuring guests. Emily wanted to say more, but before she could, one of her father's aides interrupted, reminding her of her duties. She watched James leave, a quiet disappointment settling in her chest. The following days felt different. Emily couldn't stop thinking about James, his calm confidence, his genuine smile, the way he seemed untouched by the pretenses that defined her world. She replayed their brief interaction in her mind, searching for answers to questions she couldn't articulate. Who was he, really? What kind of life did he lead? And why did he make her feel something she hadn't felt in years? Hope? Driven by curiosity, she made discreet inquiries. It wasn't difficult to find out that James was a firefighter stationed at a modest firehouse on the edge of the city. He came from a working-class background, the son of a teacher and a mechanic, and had spent his career dedicated to helping others. Everything about him seemed to defy the world Emily had grown up in, and yet, it intrigued her. On a crisp autumn afternoon, she found herself outside his firehouse, her heart pounding as she hesitated at the door. The building was simple and unassuming, its red brick walls a far cry from the grand estate she called home. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, where the scent of smoke and engine oil filled the air. James spotted her immediately, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it softened into a welcoming smile. "Emily," he said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to thank you again," she began, clutching her purse nervously. "And I thought maybe I could learn more about the work you do." He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Most people don't give us much thought until they need us." "Well, maybe that should change," she replied, her voice gaining confidence. "What you do matters." James led her to a quiet corner of the station, where they talked for what felt like hours. He shared stories of his job, some heartwarming, others heartbreaking, and she listened intently, marveling at the depth of his passion and courage. For the first time, she felt truly connected to someone, not because of their status or wealth, but because of their character. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily realized something profound. James wasn't just different from the men her father paraded before her. He was everything she had been searching for. In his presence, she felt free, untethered from the expectations that had weighed her down for so long. But with that freedom came a question she couldn't ignore. What would her father do if he found out? Emily knew she was stepping into uncharted territory. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready to take the risk. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary things happen when you least expect them. Emily and James quickly fell into a rhythm that felt effortless, like the kind of bond she'd only read about in the books tucked away in her library. First, their relationship was a fragile, secretive thing. Emily, hesitant to disrupt her carefully constructed world, kept their growing connection hidden from her father. They met in the quiet corners of the city, parks bathed in golden sunsets, cozy diners where no one would recognize her, and even the fire station, where James's team welcomed her with warmth she'd rarely encountered among her father's associates. For Emily, these moments with James were a revelation. She laughed freely in his presence, shedding the constant weight of her family's expectations. He taught her to find joy in simplicity, from sharing greasy burgers and fries at a roadside diner to watching the city lights twinkle from a quiet hilltop. James had a way of grounding her, of making her feel like just Emily, not Emily Kensington, the billionaire's daughter. James, for his part, marveled at Emily's resilience. He could see the strain she carried from a lifetime of being told who she had to be. He admired her quiet strength, the way she listened with genuine curiosity when he talked about his work or his childhood in a modest neighborhood. She never judged or condescended, instead expressing admiration for the life he had built through hard work and grit. But as their bond deepened, so did the tension. Emily's world and James's world were not meant to intertwine, and they both knew it. Her father had made it abundantly clear, through his words and actions, that status and appearances mattered more than anything else. The Kensington name, Robert often said, was a legacy that must be upheld. Emily could only imagine his reaction if he discovered she was seeing a firefighter. One evening, as they sat on a park bench beneath a canopy of stars, James gently broached the subject that had been lingering between them. "Emily," he said, his voice low and steady, "I don't want to cause trouble for you. If this us is too much, I'll understand." Emily turned to him, her expression resolute. "It's not too much, James. Being with you feels like the first real thing I've ever had. I'm tired of living a life that isn't mine." Her words hung in the air, a quiet declaration of defiance against everything that had kept her bound. James reached for her hand, his thumb brushing against her fingers. "Then we'll figure it out," he said. Together. But figuring it out proved harder than either of them anticipated. As their relationship grew more serious, the challenges of keeping it a secret became insurmountable. Emily's frequent absences from the Kensington estate did not go unnoticed, and her father's suspicions grew. He began to question her more aggressively, his tone sharp and unrelenting. "Where have you been, Emily? Who are you spending time with?" The walls around her carefully hidden romance were beginning to close in. One evening, as she returned home from a particularly long day with James, Emily found her father waiting for her in the grand foyer. His expression was cold, his arms crossed over his chest. "We need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emily followed him into his study, her heart pounding. The room, with its dark wood paneling and imposing desk, had always felt suffocating, but tonight it was unbearable. Robert closed the door behind them and turned to face her. "You've been acting differently," he said, his piercing gaze fixed on her. "Sneaking off for hours at a time, avoiding your responsibilities. I want to know who it is." Emily hesitated, her mind racing. She had prepared for this moment. But now that it was here, the words felt heavy in her throat. "His name is James," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "James Carter." Robert's expression darkened. "And who is this James Carter? Some wealthy heir I haven't heard of." Emily lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "He's a firefighter." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's face twisted with disbelief and anger. "A firefighter?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You're throwing away everything for a man with no money, no connections, no future." "He has a future," Emily shot back, her voice firm. "And he has something you've never valued: kindness, integrity, and courage. He makes me happy, father. And that's more than I can say for anything you've ever chosen for me." Robert slammed his hand on the desk, his voice thundering through the room. "You will end this nonsense immediately. Do you have any idea what people will say? What this will do to our family's reputation?" "I don't care about our reputation," Emily shouted, her voice breaking. "For once in my life, I'm choosing something for myself. I love him, and I'm not going to give him up." Robert's face hardened. "If you continue with this foolishness, you will lose everything. No money, no home, no access to the Kensington name. Is that what you want?" Emily felt tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "If that's what it takes to be with the person I love, then yes." Robert stared at her, stunned by her defiance. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "And when it all falls apart, don't come crawling back to me." Without another word, Emily turned and walked out of the study, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She went to her room, packed a small bag, and left the estate that had been her prison for so many years. As she stepped into the crisp night air, she felt a mix of fear and liberation. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, but for the first time, she was walking toward a future that was hers. James was waiting for her outside, leaning against his truck. When he saw her, his face filled with concern. "Emily, are you okay?" She managed a small smile. "I told him everything. He didn't take it well." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "We'll figure it out together." As they drove away from the estate, Emily looked back one last time, the towering mansion fading into the distance. She had chosen love over fear, and while the road ahead was uncertain, she knew she had made the right decision. With James by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would build a life on their terms, free from the shadows of the past. Emily's new life with James was everything her old one wasn't. Unpredictable, modest, and undeniably real. They lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the sprawling Kensington estate. But for the first time, Emily felt at home. She found joy in the simplest things: cooking dinner together, laughing over burnt toast, or spending quiet evenings wrapped in each other's arms. Yet, even in this newfound happiness, the shadow of her father lingered. Robert Kensington was not a man accustomed to losing, and his daughter's defiance had struck a blow to both his pride and his carefully curated image. While Emily adjusted to her new reality, Robert set his plans in motion. He froze her bank accounts, canceled her credit cards, and used his influence to make finding stable employment nearly impossible. For a man like Robert, control wasn't just a preference, it was his identity. And if he couldn't control Emily, he would make her regret choosing James. The cracks began to show when Emily lost her job at a local nonprofit, her first step toward independence. Her supervisor, visibly uncomfortable, called her into the office one afternoon. "Emily, I hate to do this," she said, wringing her hands. "You're talented, and the team loves you, but we've received pressure from some of our donors. I'm so sorry, but we can't afford to lose their support." Emily understood without needing further explanation. The donor was her father. Of course, and his message was clear. She would either return to his control or face the consequences. As she left the office with a box of her belongings, a mix of frustration and determination simmered in her chest. She wasn't surprised, but that didn't make the sting any less sharp. James greeted her at the door when she arrived home, his face falling as he saw the box in her hands. "What happened?" he asked, guiding her inside. "It's my father," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "He's trying to push me back, but I'm not going to let him." James sat beside her on their worn couch, his hand on her knee. "You don't have to fight this alone. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." As the weeks went by, Emily and James leaned on each other more than ever. Their love deepened in the face of adversity, each challenge strengthening their resolve. But the obstacles kept coming. Robert's influence reached farther than Emily had imagined, and James soon began to feel the pressure as well. Whispers about his relationship with Emily spread through his fire station, and even some of his colleagues treated him differently. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to remind James of the gap between their worlds. Despite the mounting difficulties, Emily and James pressed forward. They began planning their wedding, choosing a small, intimate ceremony in a local park. Emily sold the last of her jewelry to cover the costs, determined to build their life together without her father's resources. Every detail of the wedding, from the simple decorations to the borrowed sound system, reflected their love and resilience. The day of the wedding dawned crisp and bright, the sky a perfect canvas of blue. Emily stood under the shade of a towering oak tree, her simple white dress catching the sunlight. James waited for her at the altar, his smile steady and warm. The small gathering of friends and colleagues buzzed with quiet excitement, their joy radiating in the gentle breeze. As Emily walked down the makeshift aisle, her heart swelled with emotion. She locked eyes with James, feeling the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. This was their moment, a declaration of love and defiance in the face of every obstacle. But just as she reached the altar, a familiar voice shattered the tranquility. "Stop this at once." Robert Kensington's authoritative tone cut through the air, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. All eyes turned to him as he marched toward the ceremony, his expression a mask of fury. Emily's chest tightened as she turned to face him. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I'm here to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life," Robert said, his gaze flickering to James with disdain. "You think this man can give you the life you deserve? He's nothing but a firefighter." Emily, poor, delusional nobody. James, standing tall beside Emily, took a deep breath. "With all due respect, sir, I love your daughter. I don't claim to be wealthy, but I'll work every day to give her the life she deserves." Robert laughed bitterly. "Love? Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't secure a future. You have nothing to offer her." James's jaw tightened, but he didn't waver. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Actually, Mr. Kensington, I think you're mistaken about who I am." Robert narrowed his eyes as James handed him the paper. "What is this?" he asked, scanning the document. "It's the portfolio of my company," James replied evenly. "Phoenix Safety Innovations. We specialize in cutting-edge fire safety technology. Our systems are used in some of the largest corporations in the country, including yours." The crowd gasped, their shock rippling through the serene garden. Emily's eyes widened as she turned to James. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. James looked at her, his expression softening. "Because I didn't want this to be about money or status. I wanted you to love me for who I am." Robert's face turned pale as he continued to read. The company was valued in the millions, its reputation impeccable. His grip on the paper faltered as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. "I built Phoenix from the ground up," James continued, his voice steady. "But I didn't tell you because it doesn't define me. What defines me is my love for Emily, my commitment to her, and my willingness to fight for our future." The crowd erupted in applause, their admiration for James evident. Robert, speechless for the first time in years, looked between James and Emily, the anger in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something unfamiliar, regret. Emily stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "This is the life I've chosen, Father, not because of money or status, but because of love. If you can't accept that, then you're the one losing out, not me." Robert stared at her, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his defeat. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily and James to stand hand in hand at the altar. Their love had withstood the ultimate test, and as they exchanged vows, they knew they had already won. Emily and James's life as newlyweds was anything but glamorous, but it was undeniably theirs. Their small apartment, though modest, became a sanctuary filled with love, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of building something real together. The luxurious trappings of Emily's old life were gone, replaced by the thrill of navigating the unknown. Every day was a small victory, a new job for Emily, a shared meal they cooked from scratch, or the sheer joy of waking up beside the person she had chosen against all odds. Adjusting to her new reality wasn't without challenges. Emily, who had once been chauffeured to every destination, now relied on the city bus and her own 2 feet. She swapped designer dresses for second-hand blouses, learning to appreciate the simplicity and freedom they represented. But the hardest part wasn't the lifestyle change. It was the lingering weight of her father's rejection. Despite her resolve, there were moments when she missed the familiarity of her old life, the feeling of belonging to something larger than herself. James, ever the steady anchor, reminded her that they were creating something even greater. "It's not about where you've been," he told her one evening as they sat on their threadbare couch. "It's about where we're going. And I promise, we're going somewhere amazing." Emily found work at a small community center, helping organize programs for underprivileged children. The job was a far cry from the prestigious nonprofit she had worked at before, but it was deeply fulfilling. Each day, she saw firsthand how small acts of kindness could transform lives, and it gave her a sense of purpose she had never experienced in her old world. The children adored her, and their laughter filled the once empty corners of her heart. Meanwhile, James continued to balance his dual roles as a firefighter and the CEO of Phoenix Safety Innovations. His days were long and often exhausting, but he thrived on the sense of purpose both jobs provided. Emily admired his resilience, the way he approached every challenge with determination and humility. On nights when he came home smelling of smoke and sweat, she would hold him close, grateful for the man who had risked everything to be with her. Their life together wasn't without struggles. There were nights when they argued over bills or felt the strain of their demanding schedules. But even in those moments, their love remained unshaken. They had faced far greater challenges to be together, and those battles had forged a bond that was unbreakable. One evening, as they prepared a simple dinner of pasta and salad, Emily paused to watch James stir the sauce. The kitchen was small and cluttered, the opposite of the grand dining room she had grown up in, but it was filled with warmth. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, her voice soft. "The life you could have had if you hadn't chosen me?" James turned to her, his expression gentle but firm. "Emily, that life never meant anything to me. This us is everything I've ever wanted. I wouldn't trade it for the world." His words brought tears to her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude. For the first time, she realized that she didn't miss her old life. Not truly. What she had now was far more valuable: love, partnership, and a sense of authenticity she had never known before. As months turned into a year, their life began to take shape. Emily started a new initiative at the community center, launching a program that provided mentorship and resources for young adults from low-income families. Inspired by James's journey, she wanted to help others overcome the barriers they faced and reach their full potential. The program quickly gained traction, drawing attention from local media and even earning a small grant to expand its reach. James, too, saw Phoenix Safety Innovations grow in unexpected ways. His latest product, a compact fire suppression device, gained national recognition, cementing the company's reputation as a leader in life-saving technology. Despite the accolades, James remained humble, using the success to fund community initiatives and support his fellow firefighters. On their first wedding anniversary, Emily and James celebrated with a quiet dinner at home, a tradition they had come to cherish. Over candlelight and laughter, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Emily asked, twirling her fork in her pasta. "It feels like a lifetime and a blink all at once." James reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "A year ago, we stood in a park and promised to face whatever came our way. And we've done it. Together." That night, as they sat on their balcony watching the city lights, Emily leaned her head on James's shoulder, her heart full. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its imperfection. They had faced rejection, hardship, and uncertainty, but they had also found love, purpose, and a sense of home. For Emily, the Kensington name no longer defined her. She had built a new legacy, one rooted not in wealth or power, but in resilience, compassion, and the courage to follow her heart. And as she looked out at the sprawling city before them, she knew that this was only the beginning. With James by her side, the future was a canvas waiting to be painted, one bold and beautiful stroke at a time. The park was alive with the soft hum of laughter and the rustle of leaves as a gentle breeze swept through the rows of chairs. It was a perfect day for a wedding, the kind of crisp, sunlit afternoon that made everything seem brighter, more hopeful. Emily stood at the edge of the clearing, her hands clutching her bouquet, her breath catching at the sight of James waiting for her at the altar. He looked dashing in his neatly pressed suit, his calm, steady gaze locked on her. The modest ceremony reflected the simplicity they had embraced. Friends from the fire station were seated alongside Emily's new colleagues from the community center, all there to celebrate a love that had overcome every obstacle. The makeshift aisle was lined with wildflowers they had gathered together, and a borrowed sound system played the soft strains of a piano melody. Every detail spoke of love and resilience. As Emily began her walk down the aisle, her heart swelled with emotion. Each step was a quiet triumph, a declaration of her freedom and her choice to live a life defined by love, not expectation. She barely noticed the tears streaming down her cheeks as she approached James, his warm smile steadying her nerves. But just as she reached him, a booming voice shattered the tranquility. "Stop this at once!" Gasps rippled through the crowd as heads turned to see Robert Kensington striding into the clearing, his face flushed with anger. He was flanked by two sharply dressed men, his presence as commanding as ever. The cheerful buzz of the guests dissolved into stunned silence. Emily's hands trembled as she turned to face her father. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice trembling but defiant. Robert's gaze swept over the small gathering, his expression a mix of disdain and fury. "I'm here to stop my daughter from throwing her life away. This is a mistake." James stepped forward, his shoulders squared, his voice calm but firm. "With all due respect, Mr. Kensington, this is Emily's decision, not yours." Robert's eyes narrowed, his focus now entirely on James. "You think you're worthy of her? A firefighter with no money, no pedigree, no future? You're nothing but a charity case in a suit." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, the insult cutting through the joyous atmosphere like a knife. Emily felt her anger rise, her voice trembling as she replied, "Stop it, Father. You don't know him. You've never even tried to know him." Robert ignored her, his eyes locked on James. "What can you possibly offer her? Love?" he scoffed, his tone dripping with contempt. "Love doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't secure a future. And it certainly doesn't maintain the Kensington legacy." James held his ground, his expression steady. "You're right, Mr. Kensington. Love doesn't pay the bills, but it does build a life worth living." And I'll spend every day proving that to Emily. Robert laughed bitterly. Prove it? How do you plan to do that? Exactly. James reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a neatly folded document. He handed it to Robert, his voice calm but resolute. You might want to read this before you make any more assumptions. Robert hesitated before snatching the paper, his expression one of disbelief as he began to read. The crowd watched in stunned silence as his eyes scanned the document, his face paling with each line. It was a portfolio Phoenix Safety Innovations, the company James had built from scratch. The numbers were staggering, the achievements undeniable. This can't be real, Robert muttered, his voice faltering. It's very real, James said evenly. Phoenix Safety Innovations started as a small project to improve fire safety equipment. Today, it's a multimillion-dollar company that saves lives every day. Your company, Mr. Kensington, uses our systems. In fact, our technology helped prevent a major disaster at one of your facilities last year. Robert's hands trembled as he looked up, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. You're telling me you own this company? Yes, James replied simply. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I love Emily. I didn't tell her about Phoenix because I wanted her to know me for who I am, not for what I have. Emily stared at James, her heart swelling with emotion. You never told me, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. James turned to her, his eyes softening. I didn't want this to be about money. I wanted it to be about us. The crowd erupted into applause, their admiration for James evident in their cheers. Emily felt tears streaming down her face as she stepped forward, taking James's hand. It was always about us, she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotion in her chest. Robert, still reeling, struggled to regain his composure. Even if this is true, he said, his tone less confident now, it doesn't change the fact that you'll never belong in our world. James met his gaze, unflinching. I don't need to belong in your world, Mr. Kensington. I've built a world of my own. And Emily is the only person I care about sharing it with. Emily turned to her father, her voice calm but firm. This is the life I've chosen, Father, not because of money or status, but because of love and integrity. If you can't accept that, then I'm sorry, but I'm not changing my mind. For the first time, Robert looked uncertain. He opened his mouth to speak but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he turned and walked away, his associates trailing behind him. The weight of his absence lingered, but Emily felt a profound sense of relief. She had stood her ground, and for the first time in her life, she felt free. The ceremony continued, the vows exchanged under the shade of the oak tree. As Emily and James declared their love, the crowd erupted into cheers once more. They kissed, sealing their union with a promise to face whatever came their way. Together, afterward, the reception buzzed with joy and laughter. Friends toasted to their love, and Emily found herself surrounded by a warmth she had never experienced in her father's world. She and James danced under the stars, their movements unhurried, their hearts full. As the night wore on, Emily looked around at the people who had supported them, at the life she and James had begun to build. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it didn't matter. For the first time, she felt truly alive, unbound by expectations and ready to embrace whatever the future held. And as she rested her head on James's shoulder, she knew they had already won. The morning after their wedding, Emily woke to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a moment, she lay still, her head resting on James's shoulder, listening to the gentle rhythm of his breathing. Their modest apartment felt warmer, brighter somehow, as though it, too, had been transformed by the vows they had exchanged the day before. A smile spread across her face as the events of the previous day replayed in her mind. They had done it, against all odds. They had begun their new life together. James stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her. Good morning, Mrs. Carter, he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Emily replied, her laugh soft and full of joy. She tilted her face toward his, their eyes meeting in a moment of quiet intimacy. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt entirely at peace. Their new beginning was not just a fresh chapter. It was an entirely different book. Gone were the towering gates and sprawling estates of Emily's former life. In their place were late-night conversations on their balcony, shared meals cooked in their tiny kitchen, and a love that grew stronger with every challenge they overcame together. Their home was modest, but it was filled with warmth, laughter, and the unshakable bond they had built. Emily threw herself into her work at the community center, her passion for helping others reignited. She found joy in creating programs that gave young people a chance to dream beyond their circumstances. Inspired by her own journey of breaking free from expectations, the children adored her, and their progress reminded her daily why she had chosen this path. Every laugh, every small victory, was a testament to the beauty of living a life driven by purpose and love. James, too, flourished in their shared life, balancing his role as a firefighter and his responsibilities at Phoenix Safety Innovations kept him busy. But he never let it overshadow the moments they carved out for each other. On weekends, they would take long walks through the city, explore quiet coffee shops, or simply spend hours at home, talking about the life they were building. One crisp evening, as they stood on their balcony overlooking the city lights, Emily leaned into James's side, her voice soft. "Do you think he'll ever come around?" she asked, the question lingering in the air. James didn't need her to explain who she meant. He paused, his hand gently tracing circles on her back. "I think your father loves you, even if he doesn't know how to show it. Maybe one day, he'll see what we've built and realize that love is more important than pride." Emily nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. She had made peace with her decision. But the door to reconciliation with her father remained slightly ajar, waiting for him to take the first step. As they stood together, the city stretching out before them, Emily realized that their new beginning wasn't about perfection, it was about possibility. Every challenge they faced was a chance to grow, to deepen their connection, and to prove to themselves and the world that their love was worth every sacrifice. In that moment, she knew they would face the future together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. In the end, Emily and James's journey wasn't just a story about love. It was a testament to courage, resilience, and the power of choosing what truly matters. Their path had been anything but easy, fraught with challenges, heartbreak, and the weight of expectations they had defied together. Yet, through it all, they had emerged stronger, bound by a love that refused to be shaken by wealth, status, or pride. Emily had discovered that happiness didn't lie in the sprawling estates or the lavish galas of her former life. It was in the small, quiet moments with James, the way he made her feel seen and valued, the laughter they shared over burnt dinners, and the warmth of his hand in hers when the world seemed too heavy. Together, they had built a life that reflected their deepest values: love, integrity, and the freedom to be their authentic selves. Their story reminded everyone that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the relationships we nurture and the courage we show in living authentically. It was a lesson that even Robert Kensington, for all his pride, couldn't ignore. And as Emily and James faced their future together, their hearts full and unyielding, they proved that the greatest legacies are born not from power, but from love.